My name is Jeff Greenberger. I'm the president of Affordable Community Energy Services, or ACE. I'm joined on the panel today by Chris Jedd, who is the portfolio energy manager for the Denver Housing Authority, and Nicole Steele, who's the executive director for the Mid-Atlantic region of Alternative. We're all sort of committed to this socially equitable delivery of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and water conservation to low-income communities. But a lot of what we're going to talk about apply to any communities and even any property types. Just before we start, if we could just do a show of hands, how many of you are involved in multifamily housing? And how many of those are affordable housing? Great. Owners or managers of developers of other classes of real estate? Okay, good. Service providers, architects and designers and construction, products? Okay. Well, great. We're, as I said, about delivering these services, sustainable services to low-income families. The learning objectives, if you will. Chris is going to talk to you about a 2-megawatt community solar project that the Denver Housing Authority developed, talk about the benefits that it bestows, and share some tricks about using data in your negotiations. I'm going to talk a lot about the economics behind solar, but also ways to reframe energy efficiency, water conservation, and solar improvements from a financial standpoint. And Nicole is going to talk about her firm's service delivery of really workforce development training to support low-income communities. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to tell you about his project in Denver.
Great. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. I know it's the last session of a long day.
I forgot one thing. Sorry. I forgot the most favorite thing, which is I'm going to pose a question to all of us. You've been living this question for the last couple of days, and we're all going to go out and live it, I'm sure, going forward. The teaser question is, will they like us? The underlying question is, will our grandchildren and their children think we did everything possible to save the planet? And I think that's what most of the people here are about. And I hope that we'll all work as hard as we can to be able to answer that question positively as the years go on. With the sermon over, now I'll handle it to Chris.
All right. Thanks. Well, I don't have any grandchildren. I'm just trying my best to have my children to like me right now. I got a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, so I'm doing my best. Denver Housing Authority, real quick for the folks that aren't super familiar with affordable housing. We're a quasi-municipal government organization. Our board, we're technically not part of the city and county of Denver, but the mayor, Mayor Hancock, appoints our board of commissioners, and then they appoint our executive director, and then he runs the staff. What we essentially build, develop, own, and operate affordable housing. And it's important to note when I say affordable, I mean a whole different range of incomes. It gets as, generally speaking, the highest we go is 80% of area median income, and that's typically in Denver at least. Those are entry-level professional jobs, entry-level firefighters, accountants, kids right out of school, and then we go as low as well below 30% of area median income, which is very low income. So it's a large breadth of different folks we serve, and also we serve seniors, we serve disabled folks, we serve large families, small families, we serve millennials. So it's definitely the Housing Authority. We try to develop and build properties that provide affordable housing for that whole spectrum, and probably a lot of stuff I didn't mention too. But within that, we really try to focus on being as sustainable as we can. It's our obligation and our duty to provide our residents in the community with sustainable housing as best we can. So in addition to energy efficiency retrofits, we focus very aggressively on solar and solar gardens. So this is Denver Housing Authority. I'm a little bit behind. But essentially we have 11,000 units that we own, operate, and maintain through either public housing, project-based Section 8 vouchers, low-income housing tax credits, and all those things I just mentioned are different vehicles to finance and operate affordable housing. So not all affordable housing is equal. So why do we do solar? We do solar for 3 reasons. One is the environmental benefit. We like to reduce our energy use intensity as much as we can and support solar and deploy solar as aggressively as we can. 2 is for our residents, like I mentioned. We owe it to them and we owe it to the community to provide efficient housing for them, and people like solar and people want to live in communities that have solar and renewable energy. And then 3 is to reduce operating expenses. Typically, almost everything I do has to be everything I do has to be financed in some way, and so it definitely has to make sense financially too. And it's you got to thread that needle of making sure it's the right fit for the property, right fit for the residents, and right fit for the finances too. So to date, behind me on this screen is what we have so far with solar. For starters, we started putting solar on our new construction probably 10, 15 years ago before I even got there. And so every time we build a building, we try to put solar on the rooftops, and we continue to do that. So that's one way to do it, but that, majority of our portfolio is existing. So that method, if that's all we did, we would, be putting solar on a lot of we wouldn't meet our goal. So second is we did a power purchase agreement with a third-party developer, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But a power purchase agreement, or a PPA, is simply when a building owner, or in our case we own lots of buildings, enters into agreement with a third-party developer, and they furnish, pay, and install solar panels on your property, and you do a power purchase agreement where you agree to pay for that power off the solar panels. So essentially it's no out-of-pocket for the building owner or the housing authority. Third-party developer brings all the money, brings all the expertise, they use your rooftops, and then you just buy the solar from them at a discount of a little less than you would have bought it from the grid. So we did 2.5 megawatts. That was 665 homes, plus or minus, of solar panels, and it worked out great. We reduced our energy spend. We became more renewable, more sustainable, and it worked fantastic. And the last one is solar gardens, and we started dabbling in community solar gardens probably 5 or 6 years ago, and that's what the rest of this presentation is going to focus on. So before we move on to solar gardens, we can start right now. The issue we had is DHA, we could use about 20 megawatts of solar capacity, and that slide before was probably, I'm thinking we have around 6. So it's like, how do we get from 20 to 6 megawatts? And as we build more affordable housing, that need's just going to grow and grow and grow. So how do you fill that gap? And the interesting thing is, out of that 2.5 megawatt power purchase agreement that I mentioned, that was 665, 66 rooftops of solar panels. And that was the only viable roof space we had on existing buildings. So, which is less than 10% of our portfolio, 660 out of 10,000 homes, we'll say. So the question is why, and how are we ever going to get to 20 megs if we don't have rooftops for it? So the reasons they aren't viable are a lot of the properties we have redevelopment plans for, or major rehab, so we can't invest in solar panels on them. 2 is shading. 3 is the rooftops aren't in the best condition. So there's a myriad of reasons why we can only find 665 homes of solar panels. So thank goodness we live in a state where community solar is available, and so community solar is where we turn. It's really the only way we can really propel and really get aggressive on solar across the portfolio. So community solar in its basic sense, there's a lot of different definitions, but this is the simplest one I like, is that it's really an array of solar panels. It could be an acre, it could be a half acre, it could be 100 acres. But it could be ground mount, it could be on the rooftops, it could be on a couple of rooftops. But the idea is it's shared by multiple meters, multiple buildings. So this is the community solar garden that DHA just finished, and this has about 10 buildings on the solar garden. So, and we were going to talk about how that happens. So, but that's, if you boil it down, that's community solar in its basic. So, community solar. A couple brief facts before we dive into DHA's project. It varies state by state. I think there's around 25, Nicole, states that have community solar. So if you're in a state that has community solar, this is, it's a great tool. If you're not, a lot of states are rolling them out, and so hopefully they'll get to your state soon. There's various models and approaches which we'll talk about. and there's various policies and metering, and not only on the solar industry, but also on the affordable housing industry in terms of a public housing home is funded and operated, and there's different rules to it than a LIHTC, which is a low-income housing tax credit property. So there are two different financing, two different operating expenses. So sometimes the residents pay utilities, sometimes they don't pay the utilities. So you really got to thread that needle of the solar policy and the affordable housing policy together and make sure that your subsidies align and it makes sense financially. So 3 ways to participate in community solar, at least only three I know of, is one is you can enter into a power purchase agreement. So similar to what I mentioned before, but this time if a third-party developer comes, they build one of these solar gardens and they say, hey, you can be a part of it. You just sign our power purchase agreement and you can buy electricity from us for cheaper than you can for the grid. So again, no out-of-pocket expense. You get to participate in renewable energy and help that cause, as well as you're reducing your operating expenses day one. So really good idea. 2 is you can buy into it, a little out of order, and that's if you have money and equity to spend. You could say, no, developer, I just want to buy a piece of that garden. I don't want to pay you every month for the electricity it generates. I just want to give you, $10,000, $20,000 right now, and whatever that piece is mine forever unless you sell it, and then whatever I get from that will be my power. So, or the third is you can develop your own. A lot of companies are doing this. A lot of other organizations are starting to do this. Cities are starting to do this, and now housing authorities are starting to do this. And by developing your own, essentially you have plenty of meters, you have plenty of buildings, you have plenty of load. So why not just develop your own solar garden and just use that power in-house? You could do it for cheaper, you could save money, and it's just a better program. So those are the 3 different approaches that I've seen across the country so far. Benefits of community solar is you don't have to have out-of-pocket money. It's clean, renewable energy. It's off-site, out-of-site, which is nice. If you have it on your rooftop, your maintenance staff may have to get special training for it. You could get damaged. This is kind of out of sight, out of mind, which is really nice. And also, you're having predictable, reduced energy costs. So the challenges with community solar that I see is that one is these contracts, or the PPAs we're talking about, are typically 15 to 20 years, which is a long-term commitment. So you really want to look into the contract language of what you're signing to say, hey, if I sell the building, what happens? Or if I demo the building, what happens? Can I find another meter? So that's one of them. And 2 is the pricing of it. And you're buying power for 20 years out, or 15 years, and everyone assumes power is going to go up. The cost of power is going to go up at a certain rate. But there is that risk that there's a new technology or something disrupts that assumption, and then you're going to pay a little premium for the power. So those are the 2 challenges which you can really mitigate those risks, as we'll talk about in a little bit. So this is DHA's Community Solar Garden. I'll let you read that, but generally speaking, what we're trying to do, this is the first one we did, we're trying to get that at 15 to 20 megawatts of solar that we need to fill our capacity with 100% renewable energy. The best, quickest way to do this is with community solar gardens. So we want to develop a 100% renewable energy community solar garden that was 100% low income, that was for low income housing. And it's important to know it's not just our housing, we also wanted to open it up to the community of Denver. So there's other affordable housing developers that are part of this. There's individual low-income residents that are a part of this. There's other housing authorities that are a part of this. So it's truly a shared community solar garden. So how do we go about it? We are a housing developer. We have expertise in developing housing. When you build a building, you need land, you need a contractor, you need a bank, you need an engineer, you need a whole slew of a great team of experts. And so obviously we had to rebuild our teams because we have teams around affordable housing buildings. So we sent out a lot of requests for proposals, and this is the team we had. So DHA was the developer and the sponsor. Namaste Solar was the EPC contractor, or engineering, procurement, and construction contractor, which is, in solar world, it's essentially a general contractor. SolarTech, that's where the site was located at, or the array is actually on. So we have a 20-year ground lease with these folks to host our solar garden. Grid Alternatives, which Nicole will speak to a little more, but they gave expertise in 2 areas. One was the policy side. As I mentioned, the policy is very state by state, so they had that granular level of policy, and then they had the workforce development side where they did a lot of training, workforce development with the community, with DHA residents. So it was a really, really exciting project, and some of our residents actually got jobs, not just for this garden, but with Namaste moving forward and with other projects too. So it was a really good win-win for not only solar, but for job training and workforce development. Ensite Energy, they were our third-party engineer, making sure that everyone else, just keeping me out of trouble, I guess. And then in the bottom row, we had Ballard Safar, who was our legal counsel. Enterprise, they were our lender, Enterprise Community Loan Fund. And then Monarch Private Capital was the equity investor to get the investment tax credit. I got to speed it up here a little bit. So this slide, if nothing else, this is the ECamp, this is the meat of community solar. This is the meat of a power purchase or community solar in Colorado. You have your solar garden, which DHA owned and developed. You have your utility, which in our case is Xcel Energy, and then you have Globeville Homes, which is a property in Denver that DHA owns. So what happens is the solar garden, sun rises, produces energy. We pipe it into the grid, into Xcel's grid. In return, Xcel gives the solar garden renewable energy credits, or RECs they're called. And so essentially it's a price, it's a couple cents per kilowatt hour. So every kilowatt hour that generates, Xcel gives Denver Solar Garden money, or DHA Solar Garden money. So then our property, we say we want to subscribe to this solar garden. So what happens is, we subscribe. It's a couple forms you fill out. Xcel, virtually, I don't think it's the same kilowatt hour, but essentially gives Globeville Home power like they normally would. But Globeville still pays for the power, just like they normally would, so there's no difference there. They get the power, they pay for the power. The only difference is because they're part of this solar garden, they get a bill credit. And so that bill credit is for every kilowatt hour they buy from this solar garden, they get, let's say, a 7-cent bill credit. So every kilowatt hour that comes out, they get 7 cents. In return, because Globeville is getting this great bill credit of 7 cents, they pay a subscription fee to Denver Housing DHA Solar Garden, and we'll say it's 4 cents. So the net savings to Globeville Homes is 3 cents. They get a 7-cent break for every kilowatt hour from the garden, and then they pay DHA 4 cents. So the 3 cent is the delta in the savings per kilowatt hour. So that's really the meat of it. And if you are interested in doing a PPA with a third-party developer, this is what you need to pay attention to: is how much are you paying for how much the credit is, and those aren't static either; those change. And so you really want to dive into those details and make sure you know everything that you're getting out of this. So 2 more slides, and then we'll hand it over here. Community solar economics. Denver Metro Solar. This is where it's at right here. This is City of Denver. The airport's right up here. It makes 2 revenue streams, Denver Metro Solar. So this is the business side of the solar garden that we set up. First revenue stream is that REC, or renewable energy credit from Xcel Energy. The second revenue stream is the payment from Globeville Homes for that power purchase agreement. So if you go back, it's getting a REC and it's getting subscription payments from the 2 homes, or from the properties rather. Just like a business, it has expenses. It has debt service. We have to pay for the land. There's operations and maintenance costs. There's management fees. There's all sorts of stuff. But the important thing at the end of the day is that it was cash flowed and it was underwritable, and the debt service coverage ratio was sufficient to get it financed through third-party financing. The capital stack on this, we definitely wanted to leverage that investment tax credit that's out there right now. So we have an equity partner, Monarch Private Capital, that brought in the whole project was about $3.8 million. Monarch Private Capital brought in just north of $1 million of tax equity, which is awesome. That's debt, we don't have to pay it back. It's just equity in the project. And then we had a loan from Enterprise Community Loan Fund at a really low cost. It was the CRA, and it was a lot of benefits to it. And then DHA also put in a small subordinate loan just to have both financing partners wanted DHA to have a little skin in the game, so we put a subordinate loan behind ECLF's loan. So that's the 3 financing sources that are getting paid back through the annual revenue that we have. So pictures, this is the field it's in. They started to do these trenches right here. They put the posts in, and it's called racking, and what the solar panels will be on. Then they start the solar panels being installed, and this was Grid's work right here. This is their solar thon, or the solar. It's essentially a big day where everyone came out and helped and volunteered to install panels. These are the inverters, and then that's when it's almost complete. And then to close, and I think I covered this, but essentially, the solar garden, that's the solar garden from the air. Essentially, the solar garden, it was interconnected last year in December, so it's about a year old. It's reducing operating expenses. It's providing DHA renewable energy resources that otherwise wouldn't have. And it's also providing our residents communities that are participating in renewable energy. So it really hit its goals. And the next step for DHA is to hopefully deploy more of these solar gardens moving forward. So that is that really sums it up. We're going to hold questions till the end just to make sure everyone has time to speak. So if you have questions, there'll be a microphone going around once we're all wrapped up. So thank you. All right.
Good job. So with a slight nod to the theme of this year's Green Build, the nature x human x nature, we're going to use a farming metaphor and talk about ways to increase your yield from solar, energy efficiency, and water conservation. And again, just extending the metaphor, roughly breaking things into planting, harvesting, tending the crop, and measuring your yield. Before we get to the specifics, two things. One is Green Build suggests that we share a little bit about our background so you know on what basis the thoughts that we share with you come. Affordable Community Energy Services, or ACE, and it shouldn't be confused with those of you who were at the conference about adverse childhood experience. We are a mission-driven energy services company. We were formed originally as a for-profit subsidiary of a nonprofit owner, manager, developer of affordable housing here in Chicago. And we were formed for the sole purpose of finding ways to help similar owners, affordable housing owners, and typically nonprofit owners, to overcome the barriers that they faced in doing comprehensive energy efficiency, water conservation, and renewable energy retrofits on their multifamily properties. And we did that by assembling teams that brought the resources, the experience, the expertise to be able to design, install, and manage those improvements. And most importantly, we committed to bring the capital at our risk, all capital that wasn't paid for by incentives or tax credits, to the project without requiring a real estate lien on any of the customers' properties or any guarantee. And that really was a secret. We did about $10 million of this work here in Chicago when we were part of the nonprofit. A couple years ago, we amiably split, and we're well into a $6 million project in California for Mercy Housing, which is one of the largest nonprofit owners of affordable housing nationally. So that's our background. Before we get to the specifics, I'm going to give you a pop quiz. So if you think about the factors that are most significant in determining whether a solar project will be financially feasible, which do you think have the most impact? So we've got on the list the strength of the sun in a particular location, insolation as they call it, the cost of installing the improvements, electricity prices that prevail at the time, real estate costs, subsidy levels, and as Chris was talking about, another factor would be the length of your power purchase agreement, or if you're putting the money in yourself, the period of time in which you have to repay the capital that you're putting into it. So make a mental note, write down what you think are the most important, and we'll try to give you some answers in the next number of slides. So you all got your answers? Again, using the metaphor, the farming metaphor, obviously some fields are better than others. This is true whether you're doing solar or energy or water efficiency projects. This is going to focus more on the solar as we go forward. The first factor is this insolation, the power of the sun. To give you a sense of magnitude, if you think about Chicago, which may be one of the less powerful suns in this country, at least the continental states. Albuquerque's sun on a typical year will produce 1.33 times the amount of solar energy as will Chicago. And this is a significant difference. But let's look at some of the other factors. So in our experience, the cost of installation and real estate costs, although they do vary by location, their proportion to the overall financial performance of a solar project are much less significant than some of these other factors that we're talking about. On the other hand, electricity prices from a given location are hugely impactful. Again, as examples, the price of electricity in California today is about 1.75 times the cost of electricity here in Chicago, and more than double what you'd see in Albuquerque. So you can see that that impacts more than the power of the sun. Similarly, subsidy levels have a huge impact. And, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, the three of us are largely deal with affordable housing, and there are subsidy levels that are in many locations happily been given to further incent delivery to those lower income communities. So these examples in some respect do relate to that. But in the Mercy Housing project that I mentioned that is going to cost somewhere around $6 million, more than half of those costs will be covered by incentives, and the other will be the money that we borrow and put into the project. And in Boston, there is a program for low-income projects in efficiency that pays 100%. Going back for a minute to the electricity prices, when you add differences in water prices from location to location, the utility price is a really big factor. And the last item that we mentioned was the length of the power purchase agreement, or the length of time over which you have to repay your own capital. Chris mentioned that most terms of solar installations are long, 15, 20, sometimes 25 years. And the real reason of that is to drive down the costs. Again, as examples, a 10-year term of PPA, the debt service is 1.6 times what it would cost if you have to pay it over 25 years. And that's the annual debt service, obviously not the total. So in a sense, it was a trick question. How many of you had a sense that it might be the things that we think are most important, which are utility prices and subsidies? That's a pretty good answer. I know that there are people who start out thinking it's the first factor, the power of the sun, but it gets dwarfed by some of these other items. So most of us will be stuck by the field that we have to harvest. So hopefully what we just talked about will give you a sense of the possibilities in your particular location. But once you decide to go forward, you have to prepare the soil. In this case, we're talking about building stakeholder buy-in. And these comments are really designed about properties where there's an active management process in place. In internal stakeholders, best practices is first to build from the property levels up and to build from executive suite down. A holistic approach has a much better chance of success than one that just goes after the top-down approach. Secondly, you have to have a real clear statement of why. What are the benefits of all these levels of internal stakeholders? Why should they do it? And it's very important to be respectful of the time of the people at the properties, where you're going to be doing the work, to do as much as you can to be open about what their support is required in this project, and actively manage to reduce it. External stakeholders, and again, this is in the context of complex capital stacks, your strategy relative to getting them to buy in is largely going to be dependent upon the terms of the agreement you have with those stakeholders, your relationships with them, and maybe the advice that you get from your legal department about how to proceed. But we would strongly recommend when you're starting one of these projects that you describe it very clearly, but don't explicitly ask for approval. Those parties that think their approval is required will be certain to tell you that. And whatever your strategy is, talk to them as early as possible so you can surface any concerns they might have about the effect of the project on their loan, if that's who you're talking to, on their partnership interest, on the regulatory implications. So diversifying your crops. We're in the world that we occupy, and it may apply to some of you and some it won't, we believe in a portfolio approach. In other words, that we want to assemble as many properties into a project, makes it bigger to make it easier to get capital, but more importantly, it diversifies your risk. If you're doing multiple projects, and this is on the energy, the efficiency and water conservation side, probably more than solar, some of your properties are going to overperform and some are going to underperform. And the more properties that you can put into the project, the better chance you have is that they'll average out in your favor. The other concept, again, in the context of working with owners of multifamily affordable housing, is what we call the whole forest approach, which is another way to talk about portfolios, which says that if you can combine properties that present larger opportunities, it then allows you to bring smaller properties in that by themselves would not be financially feasible. Hopefully that's relevant to those of you who are not involved in the world that we are. And similarly, we believe strongly on the efficiency side in the whole tree approach, as opposed to a low-hanging fruit approach. And this concept says you use the faster paybacks from the improvements that like lighting or water, essentially to average down the cost of improvements that are more capitally intensive, and which again are harder to justify financially by themselves, but when you average the cost together, do make a feasible project. Any good farmer will keep her eye out on her crops and take constructive action when necessary. And the same is with us, whether it be a solar project, energy efficiency, water conservation project. It's extremely important that you're diligent about the performance so that you can identify shortfalls and fix them as quickly as possible. Today, most of that work is reliant on the monthly bills that come out from the utilities. Increasingly, we're all looking for cost-effective means of having real-time metering or other measurement devices at the properties. We're currently looking for that ourselves. So if any of you know about or happen to be selling cost-effective metering, would love to hear about it afterwards. And the reason why you want to keep on top of the performance is that you will run across inevitably performance pests. In the case of solar, it might be nature. It may be what we can generously refer to as inadvertent incompetence by your utility company, who may not give you credit for the production or the savings that you actually produced. In energy, it's oftentimes resident behavior, but it's also a case where technology is meant to work in certain circumstances, and every property is a snowflake, so you have to make sure that you've adjusted its installation to work with the particularities of any property. And for water consumption, it might be irrigation or other operational protocols. Leaks are a big part of managing your savings in that area in water. And again, energy, resident behavior is a big factor. So Though that's a quick flyby. If you probably can't choose the field that you're going to harvest, but prepare the soil by getting your stakeholders involved. Be holistic, think of the whole forest and the whole tree, and be careful to monitor your performance and actively address shortfalls. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole.
Well, hello, everyone. How are you doing at 5 p.m. on whatever day today, Thursday? Okay, yeah. How many, they warned us about these lights. How many of you guys actually saw our presentation at the Community and Affordable Housing Summit earlier this week? I can't really see anybody out there, so I trust you're all in your underwear, so we'll be good to go. So I am keeping with pictures, and so part of what I focus on is the whole person. And so Jeff talked a lot about the whole tree and the whole forest, and now we're going to sort of segue into that whole person. So I'm Nicole Steele. I'm the Executive Director of Grid Alternatives Mid-Atlantic. Grid Alternatives, folks out there know what Grid Alternatives is? Cool. I'm going to give you the speech anyway. So Grid Alternatives is the nation's largest nonprofit solar installer. We work exclusively in low to moderate income communities, and we use a job training model to do those installations themselves. I'm very proud to be the executive director and founder of the Mid-Atlantic affiliate. We are together but separate in that I have my own board of directors and my own budget and all of that, partially because what Chris was talking about is that energy policy is very local. And so for those of you working in this space, you know that you're going to be dictated by those policies done at the state and local level. And so that's why it's so important to have that affiliate model. So we were started out in California about 15 years ago, and we became the administrator of a California Public Utility Commission program called SASH, and I always screw up the name of what it actually stands for, but believe me, it's something about single-family affordable solar and housing. And so we administer that program, and what we did is provide and still do provide solar at no cost to those homeowners. And why did we do that? And why is it so important to make sure that everyone is included in this new clean energy economy? Our mission is to make sure that clean renewable energy is accessible to everyone. So why do we do that? Well, we want to make sure that low-income communities are serviced first, not last, in this new clean energy transition. And why is that? It's because communities are disproportionately impacted by their utility bill on a day-to-day. And that's why we have programs like LIHEAP. So it's the low-income heating and energy assistance program. But, what if we could, teach somebody how to fish rather than, give someone the fish? And we can do that by, helping the environment, by installing clean energy, and perhaps take away from, the smog-producing energy sources that, cause asthma in a lot of the neighborhoods and a lot of the communities that we work in. So when you pay a disproportionate part of your utility or your income on utility bills, you have less ability to invest in yourself and invest in your community. And so when we're able to reduce someone's utility bill by installing solar by a minimum of 50%, you're able to, give that family community wealth. You're able to help build their own personal wealth. And that really helps lift up entire communities. And so imagine if we're able to make solar available to all low-income individuals, across the country. And that's actually one goal that we're trying to do in the District of Columbia. So we're physically located in Washington, D.C. here, or not here, we're in Chicago. Over in the Mid-Atlantic, where apparently it's snowing and everyone's losing their mind. But so we do this because, the Solar for All program was passed as part of a local policy to increase the RPS. And how many people know what an RPS is? About half. So an RPS is a renewable portfolio standard, and it's a mechanism that we work closely on, or we work with a number of different organizations on to help subsidize solar, and it's financing, sort of something we're able to leverage in our financing model to make solar more affordable. And so if the RPS standards are higher and condensed further in, those RECs, those solar renewable energy credits, are actually more valuable. And so they're able to cover a larger portion of the the cost of the system itself. And so we passed a 50% RPS bill about 2 years ago at DC City Council. And as part of that, we created a Solar for All program. There's a Solar for All program here in Illinois, and we're very excited to be part of that as well. But what we did in DC is made the goal of, by 2032, make sure that we have serviced all low-income residents up to that 80% AMI with solar, and cut their utility bills in half by 50% by 2032. And so utilizing the sort of basis of that good policy that's helping promote market growth, we're then plowing that sort of utility payment to sort of meet that requirement back into our communities, and making sure that we're lifting up our low-income neighborhoods as well. And so I'm talking about job training today, and it is such an integral part of what we do as an organization. And so we started out with single-family homes, and then we moved into the multifamily affordable housing space, and then we moved into the community solar space. And it's really this sort of all-of-the-above solar approach. Not everyone's rooftop is perfect for solar, and so that's why we need to be exploring all of these different options for deploying solar, whether it be distributed generation or utility scale. There should not be an either or, it should definitely be a both. And making sure that if we are providing that distributed generation, that folks are able to access it and build their own community wealth. And so you see that bill reduction. What if they also were able to get a career in solar? What if they don't really know about solar and they're just learning about it because their aunt is receiving solar from Grid Alternatives? We give them that opportunity to get out on the roof and really be part of all of our installations. Every single installation we do, we allow for volunteers or job trainees or anyone that's interested in getting up on the roof. You do not have to know how to use a hammer or a broom or whatever it might be. We will teach you everything. And part of the purpose of that is to make sure that everyone in the community is part of these conversations and that we're lifting everyone up together. So we have a lot of different ways that we approach job training. And that I mentioned, we have volunteers. So that's sort of step one. We have a volunteer model that allows for folks to come out on all of our installs. Step two, we have a Solar Futures program where we have an entire curriculum that's available online. So if you go to our website, there's open source curriculum that you can utilize, K through 12. Anyone can access that material, and we go in and we talk to students about what is solar, what's the importance of solar, and what is the importance of energy efficiency, and how can you be part of that? And so one of the things that I think is really, really cool about the Solar Futures program is that I can remember when I was a kid that we would talk about recycling all the time. And so I would go home and I would drive my parents nuts about recycling. And so sort of today the new standard is these kids go home and drive their parents nuts about solar. And if they can convince their parents to go solar, I think that's definitely a good step in the right direction. And I think also part of it is getting them young. And it's not like solar is this esoteric thing that is way over there and the utilities are in charge of it and we have nothing to do with it and I can't have any part of it. It really creates an opportunity for folks to bring it into their community and have a better understanding of what it is and what it does. So we have our school program, our K through 12. We then also have a solar spring break program. So if you know anybody in college, we're always looking for new universities to partner with to come out to our different affiliate offices all around the country and spend a week installing solar in their communities. And that's one way, again, to get folks connected while they're still in school, when they're still trying to figure out, what their career is going to be. And we have a very strong relationship with HBCUs around the country to make sure that we are, getting the word out to everyone. And so then we have what we call our AmeriCorps program. And it's a year-long fellowship program where we recruit individuals from the communities that we work in to join us for, well, I said a year, but it's really 13 months. And they're in all different types of roles in the organization. Sometimes, and most of the time, it's construction, so it's the actual installation side of things. But sometimes they're in the outreach side of things, which is that boots on the ground, those folks telling the story, knocking on doors, tabling at events. Those are really the sort of for-profit sales people, really educating the community about solar and getting the word out. We have folks in our workforce development team. We have folks in our multifamily project business development team. We have folks in our communications team. So it's all incredibly important that, folks can see that you don't necessarily have to install to be part of this new clean energy economy. There's so many different roles there. But if you are interested in installing, it's still a very good career in that, the average solar installer makes $24 an hour. And that's, just basically start. That's an installer. That's not a team lead. That's not a project manager. That's not a designer. That's an installer. And so, we're really talking about good careers and career pathways for folks that live in the communities that we work in. And so not only do we try to provide solar that's reducing utility bills by 50% on their day-to-day, their month-to-month, but we're also trying to give folks an opportunity to really be, part of this new clean energy economy. And so I'm really proud of the AmeriCorps piece, but then also we designed a program in the District of Columbia called SolarWorks DC, and part of the reason why I toot our little horn about it is because we've won a handful of awards over the past month, and I think that says a lot, and I think it's because traction is really starting to pick up, but part of it is also other people are able to tell a story for us, and we're seeing a 70% placement rate with our job trainees. We partner directly with industry to not only place our trainees, but also to get a better understanding of what they're really looking for in people that are going through a solar jobs training program. And so that we're not training folks for an industry or for a certain job where there's not jobs available, and that's so important to what we're doing. And I get on stage regularly and I say, did you know that 90% of Mid-Atlantic employers find it somewhat or very difficult to hire qualified employees? And that's a problem because, how are we going to meet all of these solar goals, these huge lofty goals of deploying solar over the next 12 years, or we're all going to fall into oblivion? We need the workforce, and we might as well be making sure that everyone's part of that conversation. And again, it's a good paying career. And so again, going back to that whole person mentality, it's so important that, we're making sure that we're providing services to folks to succeed in the program. And so we look at childcare and making sure folks have access to childcare. We look at transportation and make sure individuals have a way to get to not only the training and meet the requirements of the training, but also be able to get to a job after they graduate. And that's such an important piece of, what we do, because there's so many barriers out there that, a lot of folks that we work with need to overcome. We include financial literacy, computer literacy, time management, all of those things that are just so important to make an individual successful. And then, after sort of the 12-week program, we send folks off into the world, but we don't just say goodbye and that's it. We maintain a relationship, and I think that's the thing that's really, really important about what we do, and that we're trying to build community and we're trying to build family as part of this, sort of solar transition. And so once you're part of GRID, once you get out on a roof with us, once you help support a trainee, you mentor them and teach them how to, talk about the skills they just learned. You come in and maybe you volunteer with us to do door knocking, whatever it might be, you are always part of our community. And so and that's the piece that I think everybody here in the audience needs to sort of recognize and understand that, it's not just the one-time thing and that we are all in this together. So I'm going to do something kind of cheesy. So everybody stand up. I know it's late. And if you're standing next to someone, grab their hand and lift it in the air and say, power. All right, everybody, one more time. We have the power. Power. Cool. Okay. Thanks, guys. You guys have the power. We have the power for this transition, and we really appreciate you listening to all of the pieces of the puzzle. You have about 8 minutes to answer questions, so thanks for sticking around. And somebody has a microphone.
Somebody's getting a microphone.
Gotcha.
If you have a question in a loud voice, you can go ahead. By the way, those of you who are leaving, we completely understand, but if you have questions and want to send it to us by email, please do.
I hear it.
Do we have a question?
Yeah, you can just yell.
That's 4. I hear it. Okay. I must not look yet. Here, give him a 5. Test. Give him 5. Got a transmitter on 4. This.
How does that impact affordability, and what do you see in the future for that?
I will say I had a little trouble hearing that. Could you say it real quickly again with the mic?
Oh, okay. All right, take 2. So I'm interested in how the evolution of solar technology in regard to efficiency and output has impacted affordability. I made the comparison to LED lighting, how not that long ago it wasn't very common. Now it's everywhere. It's very efficient, but sometimes costly due to being recent technology. So yeah, within the last few years, how have you seen solar technology evolve in regard to efficiency and output? How does that impact affordability, and what do you see in the future?
There's a really famous and dramatic curve that shows a line that goes like this in terms of the cost per kilowatt. And of course, it has to end at a certain point, but and Nicole may have some more specific answers. There has been a steady drop, and those of us who are in this business for a while have always assumed that the subsidies would drift away as the cost of installing got cheaper, so that the affordability would remain the same. I think the drop in prices has largely outstripped the loss of subsidies where they exist, and many places like California, other places, subsidies are going up. As Nicole mentioned the other day, the wind in our face is what happens with the tariffs. But in general, we think technology will get cheaper.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think the SunShot program at DOE spent a lot of time trying to really sort of accelerate the deployment of solar through bringing down both hard costs and soft costs, and they met their goal 2 years in advance. And part of the reason for that is because there were so many programs around the country that helped with the subsidization of, solar deployment. And, once you get that sort of first market sweep out there, hard costs start to go way down. And then there's a ton of resources out there to bring your soft costs way down. And so I'm just going to use an example. About 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago at this point, I was probably buying solar panels at, somewhere around like 56 cents a watt. And that probably doesn't mean a lot to folks, but before the tariffs, they had gone all the way down to 36 cents a watt in just a 2-year time frame.
And they used to be $3 a watt.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, just 5 years prior to that. Right. Obviously there's a tariff issue that we're dealing with, and there's something called the solar coaster that we all kind of ride. So prices went up to like 52 cents a watt. We were seeing sort of 48 cents a watt. But we're already back down to 41 cents a watt. And so, even with the tariffs, and a lot of that is because new technologies are coming out, efficiency is getting higher, there's more competition in goods. We're doing a lot more manufacturing. We've gotten better at manufacturing. So there's a lot of different reasons why the costs, are going back down again. And can you imagine if we didn't have tariffs on our solar panels? They'd continue to go down, and solar would only become more and more affordable. And when it does become affordable, we're able to deploy more solar. And so, when I don't have to pay $20,000 for a solar system per house, and I'm paying $12,000 to $15,000 a system, I'm able to install more solar. And so that's really just, helping our bottom line. And then we become more efficient because we're installing more solar. And so, when you increase scale, all costs sort of go along with that. And so I think that's a really important piece. And I think it's a great question.
Any other questions? We could keep talking about that one for the rest of the day.
I'll tag along onto that and just ask, do you ever see a point at which we can completely manufacture solar in the U.S. and not be dependent on things from China and everywhere else?
I mean, I think it's a possibility, for sure. I don't see why not. That's my answer.
Not sure I would have that crystal ball.
Would be training manufacturers.
I agree, yeah. And I think there is certainly a great opportunity for that. And I know there's a lot of areas in the country that would be really interested in that. And one thing that's actually happening, and it's more around sort of the battery storage piece of it. We're seeing a lot of manufacturing facilities pop up in the States around, sort of the storage piece. Less so with panels yet, but it still does exist.
Yeah, I think the storage piece, I think in 3 to 5 years from now, you won't be hearing about solar deployment. You'll be hearing about battery deployment and how that interacts. And I think that's really going to, make stuff where you can generate solar in the day, store it, bring it down at night, or sell it whenever you need it. And I think that's the next move here, which we're looking to get into shortly.
There must be some more questions. Yes.
So in the community solar program, it looks like you sell the renewable energy credits and you're essentially hosting solar, not using renewable energy. And can you talk a little bit about the value in monetizing RECs versus, even these homes, I'm assuming to get the incentives and rebates, you're actually selling the RECs. Is that an important piece to you and your stakeholders to actually be using the physical electrons that are renewable versus hosting solar, monetizing it, and then just getting better electrical rates, essentially?
Yeah, so good question. I was asked in the last one we presented at earlier this week, and you can only get 1 REC per kilowatt hour, and if you sell it, then technically that goes somewhere else. And so we, as DHA, we would love to keep those RECs. The models I'm talking about right now, we can't find them financeable right now to underwrite if we gave up that REC. That said, so in a lot of our goals, like we're part of the Better Buildings Challenge, which is a DOE program, and if you don't get that REC, it's my understanding that you can't count that solar as renewable, so technically it isn't helping. But at this point in time, what I just explained is the best approach we have, and our utility is rolling forward some programs where you can actually keep the rec. And I don't know if there's going to be a premium around that or it's going to be a savings. I think that is TBD, but we're definitely exploring keeping that rec because it would be great. I mean, if we could keep all the recs, it'd be super awesome.
Yeah. As a developer, I'd say you have to make a choice. I mean, the value of the rec going to pay down the cost of the installation means that you're able to charge less for the electricity and therefore give a better benefit to the subscribers if you're doing community solar or the other people who are getting it. If you're interested in the value of the rec, there's going to be a trade-off in the cost of electricity, but it does get monetized. I mean, that's what it's about. And it's really a way to make sure that it's like the subsidies for efficiency projects. It just brings the cost down so that more can happen, and particularly can happen in a beneficial way to the people who you're trying to help. So,
yeah,
I hope that answers your question.
Well, and what I would just add is that when we do solar installations, we try to leverage as much tech or subsidies that we can to cover the cost, so that we're not out fundraising or charging our homeowners or charging our partners. And one of those things is tax equity. So it's the federal income tax credit that does start to step down after 2019. And, that's a subsidy that was created at the federal level that, isn't accessible by everyone. And so it's not accessible by us because we're a nonprofit, and it's not accessible by most of our homeowners because they don't have a tax appetite. And so it's, unfortunately not a well thought out subsidy because it's really, truly not equitable. And I think that's a really important piece to highlight because, when we're designing policy, we need to make sure that we're thinking about everybody and how that subsidy is going to be accessed. And then going to the, renewable energy credit piece, again, it's different state to state. And so the structure and some of the different states is that, you can hold the RECs, you can sell the RECs, you can annuitize the RECs over a certain amount of time. It just depends on, what type of upfront capital you have, what type of cash flow you need. And, if you need that upfront capital, you can do an upfront monetization. And so you're going to get less dollars over time, or less dollars overall if you had, brokered it or annuitized it over a longer time frame. But what it does is really help with cash flow and helps with accessibility in capital. And so I think that's a really, really important piece. Now going back to your original question around, what are people sort of requiring? Does it need to be on the roof? Can it be electrons that are created over here? Well, sort of my perspective is two things. If it's on your roof, it's not esoteric. And so it really becomes part of your community. And if you can see it and like your family members have it or you have it, or you see solar down the street, it's something that you become interested in and you talk about and you learn about, and it helps with the increased deployment of it. And so so that's, I'm hugely supportive of that, but I'm also hugely supportive of the community solar piece because not everybody has a roof that's great for solar. And so why would we exclude the ability to access solar if you have a crappy roof or a giant tree, which is great. I'm not telling anybody to cut down their trees or lots of HVAC, equipment up there, whatever it might be. There's lots of different reasons why solar is not good for, someone's rooftop. And so having the ability to invest in solar that's off-site is so important. It's such an important piece of the puzzle. And the more deployment we can get around the community solar piece and the more sort of tangible connection we can make to that community solar model, the more deployment we'll ultimately have. And then, maybe those electrons actually are clean energy. And so that's sort of the revolution we're looking for.
I guess that's it. Thank you.
I have one more question. I have a question for Nicole. Okay. Nicole, I was really impressed from the beginning, opening plenary, when Amal Clooney talked about changes that we're bringing in the world, how much all of three of you really in your projects are building community. I wonder if you know about how many people have been trained as installers or how many people have been through your training programs?
So we've had about 1,000 individuals go through our training program over the last 4.5 years. We have, I think it's somewhere around 10,000 nationally over the last 15 years. There's 270,000 individuals in the solar industry in the United States alone. It's one of the fastest growing industries in the country. And, people are desperate for more folks to enter into the industry. And so it's such an important piece to point out that, anyway, well.
Great job. Thank you.
Go training.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.